There is a reason some people never rely on motivation, because they've already seen through it. They understand something most people don't. That motivation is unpredictable. It comes and goes. It rises and then disappears without warning. And yet, despite that, they still show up. Every single day, not because they always feel like it, but because they no longer depend on how they feel. No excuses, no drama, no waiting to feel ready, no long internal debates, no emotional negotiations with themselves in the morning. Just action. Quiet, consistent, undeniable action. And from the outside, it almost looks effortless. Like they've unlocked something others haven't. But here's the truth. It's not willpower. It's not talent. And it's definitely not luck. What if discipline wasn't something you forced? What if it wasn't about pushing harder, trying more, or constantly fighting yourself just to stay on track? What if discipline was something you designed? Something built into your life so deeply that showing up became automatic. Like breathing, like waking up, like the small routines you no longer question. Because in Japan, there is a system, quiet, almost invisible, a way of living and structuring behavior that doesn't rely on bursts of motivation, but instead creates consistency at a level most people never reach. It doesn't demand intensity. It doesn't require you to become a completely different person overnight. Instead, it works beneath the surface. Small shifts, repeated daily, shaping behavior over time, until discipline is no longer something you struggle with, but something you simply become. And once it takes hold, once it integrates into your identity, it builds a kind of discipline, so stable, so deeply rooted, that it becomes unbreakable. You've been told discipline is about willpower, about pushing harder, forcing yourself forward, even when every part of you resists, about trying more, doing more, becoming more, through sheer effort alone, about fighting yourself, silencing the part of you that hesitates, suppressing the part that doubts, dragging yourself toward a version of life you're not fully aligned with. But that's exactly why it keeps failing you. Not because you're weak, not because you lack potential, but because the system you were given was never designed to last. Because willpower fades. It's unstable, unreliable, easily drained by stress, distraction, and the weight of daily life. It might carry you for a moment, maybe even a few days, but eventually it runs out. Motivation disappears. It feels powerful in the beginning, almost intoxicating, but it was never meant to sustain you. It spikes, and then it drops, leaving you right back where you started. And force always creates resistance. The more you try to push yourself aggressively, the more your mind quietly pushes back. You begin to associate your goals with pressure, with tension, with exhaustion. And over time, you start avoiding the very things you once wanted. So you fall into the cycle. Start, stop, restart, repeat. Each time promising yourself, this time will be different. And each time, ending in the same place. The Japanese approach is different. Quietly different, but profoundly so. It doesn't rely on intensity. It doesn't ask you to become someone extreme or to operate at 100% every single day. It relies on alignment, on working with your nature, instead of constantly fighting against it, on building systems that feel natural, sustainable, almost effortless over time. Small actions, repeated daily, so small they feel insignificant in the moment, almost too easy to matter. But that's the point, because what is easy to do is also easy to repeat. And what you repeat shapes you. Day by day, without pressure, without noise. Those small actions begin to stack. They form patterns, and those patterns become habits. And eventually, those habits become identity. Until one day, you don't have to convince yourself anymore. You don't have to push, or force, or negotiate. You simply act, because it's who you are. This is not about becoming extreme. Not about waking up at 4 a.m. or chasing perfection or burning yourself out in the name of discipline. This is about becoming consistent. Calm, steady, reliable consistency. The kind that doesn't break under pressure, because it was never built on pressure in the first place. And once you understand this system, once you begin to apply it, even in the smallest ways, something shifts. You stop starting over. You stop living in cycles of guilt and temporary motivation. You stop breaking promises to yourself. Because you're no longer making promises based on emotion. You're building actions based on structure. And slowly, quietly, almost without noticing, you become someone who follows through. Chapter 1. Kaizen, the power of small, relentless improvement. The first principle is simple, almost deceptively simple. So simple, most people overlook it entirely. But that's what makes it dangerous. Because the things that look small often hold the most power. Kaizen, a quiet word with a profound meaning. It means continuous improvement, not massive change, not a sudden, overnight transformation where everything shifts at once. Just one small step forward. Every single day, a movement so subtle, it almost feels like nothing is happening at all. Instead of trying to change your entire life in a week, instead of overwhelming yourself with impossible expectations, you focus on something smaller. You improve it by 1%, just 1%, one push-up, one page, one focused hour, one decision that moves you slightly forward instead of keeping you where you are. It feels insignificant, almost too easy to matter, almost too small to make a difference. And that's exactly why it works. Because the easier it is, the harder it is to avoid. There's no resistance, no internal battle, no voice in your head saying, "This is too much." It slips past your excuses. It bypasses your fear. It removes the friction that usually stops you before you even begin. And that's where discipline starts to change. Because discipline doesn't break when it's small. It doesn't collapse under pressure, because there is no pressure. It builds, quietly, day by day, action by action, repetition by repetition. You don't notice it at first. There's no dramatic moment, no sudden breakthrough that announces itself. Just progress, stacking in the background. And over time, something shifts. The one push-up becomes 5. The one page becomes 10. The 1 hour becomes a routine you no longer question. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it to grow. Naturally, steadily, without resistance. And then one day, you look back at who you were, at how far you've come, and you realize something almost unsettling. What once felt like nothing, what once seemed too small to matter, has become everything. Chapter 2. Shashin, the beginner's mind. The second principle is not about what you do, but how you think while you're doing it. Because your mindset quietly shapes everything. Your effort, your consistency, your ability to continue when things don't go as planned. Shoshin, the beginner's mind. A way of approaching life, as if you are always starting fresh. Not empty, but open. Not ignorant, but willing. Most people fail, not because they lack ability, but because they believe they already know. They carry expectations. They carry pressure. They carry an image in their mind of how things should look, how fast they should improve, how perfect they should be. And when reality doesn't match that image, frustration begins. They judge themselves. They overanalyze every mistake. They turn small imperfections into proof that they're not good enough. And slowly, they stop. Not because they couldn't continue, but because they made it too heavy to carry. But the beginner's mind moves differently. It has no ego, no need to prove anything, no attachment to being good right away. It shows up simply to learn, to practice, to improve, one step at a time, without pressure. There is no rush, no internal voice demanding perfection, no constant comparison between where you are and where you think you should be. Just presence, fully engaged in the process, fully aware of each attempt, each mistake, each small improvement. And because of that, there is no frustration. Mistakes are no longer failures. They become feedback, part of the process, not a reason to escape it. There is no attachment to results, no obsession with outcomes that haven't happened yet. Just the action in front of you, the moment you're in, the step you're taking right now. And something subtle begins to change. When you remove the pressure to be perfect, you remove the fear of starting. You remove the resistance to continuing. You stop hesitating. You stop overthinking. You stop quitting every time things don't go exactly as planned. And in that space, in that quiet absence of pressure, you become free. Free to try. Free to fail. Free to grow without judgment. Free to be consistent. Because consistency doesn't come from forcing yourself to be perfect. It comes from allowing yourself to keep going, even when you're not. Chapter 3. Ikigai, a reason that pulls you forward. Discipline without meaning will always collapse. You can push yourself for a while. You can rely on bursts of motivation, moments of intensity. But if there's nothing underneath it, nothing anchoring your actions, it won't last. Because effort without purpose feels heavy. It feels forced. And eventually, it feels pointless. That's why the third principle matters. Ikigai, your reason for waking up. Not the surface-level reasons. Not just goals written on paper. Not just numbers in a bank account. Not just external success that looks good from the outside. But something deeper. Something internal. Something that gives your actions weight, direction, meaning. It's the quiet answer to a powerful question. Why does this matter to me? Because when you don't have that answer, everything becomes negotiable. You skip the work. You delay the process. You tell yourself, I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow never really comes. But when your actions connect to purpose, something shifts. You don't need to force discipline anymore. You don't need to rely on willpower to carry you through resistance. Because you're no longer pushing yourself forward. You're being pulled. Pulled by something that feels real. Something that matters beyond comfort, beyond convenience, beyond temporary emotion. And that pull is stronger than motivation. Stronger than fleeting inspiration. Because it doesn't disappear when things get difficult. And they will get difficult. There will be days when you're tired. Days when nothing feels rewarding. Days when progress feels invisible and effort feels heavy again. But this time you don't stop. Not because you're forcing yourself to continue, but because stopping no longer makes sense. It would feel more uncomfortable to quit than to keep going. Because now, your actions are aligned with something deeper than how you feel in the moment. They're aligned with who you are and who you're becoming. And when discipline is connected to meaning like that, it stops being a struggle. It becomes a direction, a quiet force guiding you forward, even when everything else tells you to pause. Chapter 4. Hara Hachi Bu, Mastering Restraint. Discipline is not just about what you do. It's about what you don't do. Because most people think discipline means more. More effort, more time, more pressure, more sacrifice. They believe the answer is always to push harder, to go further, to give everything, every single time. But that's where they break. Hara Hachi Bu, a quiet principle rooted in restraint. It means stop at 80%. Not full, not exhausted, not overwhelmed, just enough. And that idea goes against everything you've been taught. Because you've been told to finish everything, to empty the tank, to prove your discipline by how far you can push yourself, even to the point of collapse. But excess creates burnout. And burnout destroys consistency. It drains your energy. It builds resistance. It makes the very thing you're trying to stay consistent with feel heavy and difficult and something you begin to avoid. So instead of showing up again the next day, you need time to recover. You hesitate. You delay. And slowly, the cycle breaks. But the disciplined person moves differently. They don't push until collapse. They don't chase exhaustion as proof of effort. They stop before it. They leave something in reserve. A small amount of energy intentionally untouched. Because they understand something deeper. Discipline is not proven in one intense moment. It's proven in your ability to return again and again and again, day after day, without resistance, without burnout. And that only happens when you respect your limits, instead of constantly trying to destroy them. So they stop at 80%, not because they couldn't do more, but because they choose not to. They choose sustainability over intensity, longevity over short bursts of effort, consistency over extremes. And something powerful begins to happen. The work no longer feels draining. It becomes manageable, repeatable. Even on difficult days, it still feels possible. And that's the difference. Because when something feels possible, you keep showing up. And that's why they can keep going long after others quit. Not because they're stronger, but because they were wise enough to stop before they had to. Chapter 5. Ritual over motivation. Here is where everything changes. Where the invisible difference between fleeting effort and unbreakable discipline is revealed. The Japanese don't rely on motivation. They don't wait for a surge of energy or an emotional spike or a day when everything feels right. They rely on ritual. The same time, the same action, every single day. No debate, no inner arguments, no decision fatigue weighing down every choice. It becomes automatic. Emotion embedded in your life so deeply that you no longer have to think about it. Like brushing your teeth, like tying your shoes. You don't ask yourself if you feel like it. You just do it. And that's the quiet brilliance of ritual. Because when discipline becomes ritual, it no longer depends on how you feel. It no longer rises and falls with your mood, your energy, or your motivation. It doesn't burn out. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't wait for permission. It simply is. You become the person who shows up. Without struggle. Without hesitation. Without questioning. Discipline becomes no longer something you chase, but something you embody. It becomes who you are. And once that happens, consistency is no longer effort. It is identity. And identity, once formed, rarely breaks. Chapter 6. The Identity Shift. This is the final piece. The one most people overlook. The quiet key that turns all effort into lasting change. Discipline is not about what you do. It is not about the number of hours you grind, the routines you follow, or the goals you check off. It is about who you believe you are. Because your actions always follow your identity. If you see yourself as inconsistent, as someone who struggles to finish what they start, as someone who gives up when it gets hard, you will act that way. Every time. But identity can shift. And when it does, everything changes. If you become someone who never skips, someone who follows through, someone who shows up, regardless of how you feel, how tired you are, or what distractions arise, then your actions no longer require force. No struggle. No debate. They change automatically, effortlessly, because they align with the person you have become. And identity is the strongest force of all. It is the silent engine behind every habit, the invisible framework shaping every choice. The reason some people succeed, not because they try harder, but because they are different. Once you embody this truth, discipline is no longer a challenge. It is a reflection of who you are. And who you are is someone who cannot be stopped. So this is the system. Not loud, not extreme, not flashy, not dependent on bursts of motivation that come and go, but quiet, deliberate, intentional, and relentlessly consistent. Small steps, repeated every day, clear purpose guiding every action, daily rituals that remove doubt and decision fatigue, and an identity forged through repetition that never breaks. It doesn't demand force. It doesn't require perfection. It doesn't collapse under pressure. This is how discipline becomes unshakable, not in a single heroic moment, not in a week of extreme effort, but over time, gradually, silently, irresistibly, until the person you were, the person who hesitated, who quit, who waited for motivation, no longer exists. And in their place is someone who shows up every day, someone who follows through every time, someone for whom consistency is no longer a choice. It becomes who you are. And that is the true power of unbreakable discipline. Now ask yourself, what is one small action you can commit to every single day starting now? Not something big, not something perfect, just something you will not skip. Because the path to unbreakable discipline doesn't begin with intensity. It begins with one decision you refuse to break. Subscribe to the Cypher Phantom.